I don't want to be a politician ever. Let's start with that.
Carlos Barruf just got his wish. Marco Rubio just clobbered him, and Barruf has said he will not run again.
They want to know they have a fighter.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz faced the fight of her life against the Bernie-crats. Bernie Sanders hoped Tim Canova could knock her out of Congress.
We don't take any money from any corporate interests, and it leaves us free to represent the people.
Meanwhile, Republicans across the state may be celebrating the fall of Alan Grayson.
What do you have a higher opinion of, Congress or dog poop?
But Republicans may be worried about the Democrat who beat Grayson and is now taking aim at Marco Rubio. Florida Republican Party Chairman Blaise Ingoglia is our special guest on primary night. Plus, we'll show you how it all comes together behind the scenes. This is Money, Power, and Politics. Well, this night played out exactly as our Fox 13 pollster predicted, so let's bring him in. Matt Towery, I've got to begin with the obvious. Any surprises tonight?
Not really. I mean, our Fox 13 poll pretty much told us that Marco Rubio was going to win this handily, and of course, Patrick Murphy wins handily as well, so we're headed on to the Murphy-Rubio battle that we all expected a few weeks ago.
You've got Carlos Barruf, who spent more than $8 million of his own money and still loses by more than 50 points. How can that even happen?
You know, well, for one thing, the Barruf ads, I don't know why they chose to do this. I'd never met Barruf personally, but they never had him speak for the most part. It was always showing him doing something or whatever, and I just don't think he ever connected with voters. I mean, he had enough ads on. We certainly saw those, but I just don't think it ever did him any good.
Then you've got in the Democratic race, Alan Grayson just getting walloped by Patrick Murphy. How much of that is persona or tone of Alan Grayson, and how much of it is the White House putting its thumb on the scale here?
I would say that Murphy had some of the best commercials that I've seen. They were very well produced, and I think this is a year in which commercials in these lower level races, because Trump and Clinton overwhelmed things, they mean a lot. And so he had a lot of money there, obviously. He had the support of Obama, and he had the support of Joe Biden, and you would see that in the end of the commercials. They say endorsed by President Obama and Vice President Biden. So that really overwhelmed Grayson. Grayson's personality hasn't helped him, let's put it that way, but Murphy, I think, was headed on with that money that he has and that presentation, and he's going to be a very strong candidate. This is going to be a real battle for this U.S. Senate seat for Marco Rubio to hold on to it.
And then you have Debbie Wasserman Schultz holding on in South Florida. Does that surprise you?
Well, I don't know. If it surprised me, it probably surprises Debbie. I think she probably didn't know what to expect, but she has held on. And, you know, I think probably the best thing that ever happened is she got out of that convention before she got into any more trouble and really dug herself too much of a hole. I mean, you had someone running from the left, and running to the left of Debbie Wasserman Schultz is sort of hard to do. So she pulled it out, and she'll be back. She's not going anywhere.
And in the U.S. Senate, so you have Murphy versus Rubio. You think that's going to be tight?
Well, our Fox 13 poll showed it about 3 points, and some other polls came out in the last few days that showed it about 3 points. Rubio slightly ahead. He's the incumbent. He would be favored as the incumbent, but it is going to be very tight, and a lot of it's going to have to do with the turnout in the presidential race, which I think is going to be the biggest turnout that we've ever seen in this country and the biggest turnout that we've ever seen in Florida, and that's really saying something.
Matt Towery, thank you for your insight and perspective and predictions once again.
Thank you, Craig.
Okay, of course, Governor Rick Scott was focused on the storm here in Tampa, as well he should be. But prior to this, he has been very involved in legislative races. There were 4 in particular that he had a preferred candidate in Republican primaries. He basically went, as I can tell, 2 for 2. 2 of his candidates prevailed, so kind of a mixed bag for Rick Scott tonight. We also have some very interesting state legislative races. Nail biter here. Take a look at this state Senate race in the Tampa Bay area. Darrell Roussan wins by 1%, and this is just a handful of votes, 60, 75 votes separating them. This one may be a long way from finished. We also have a very interesting race, dramatic one that has been playing out in Sarasota County State Senate seat District 23 here. Greg Stubbe pulls it out, but this one also was very, very close, one of the most watched races across the nation. Meanwhile, we have a very interesting Polk County congressional race here. Darren Soto pulls this one out. Susanna Randolph, who worked for Alan Grayson, this is Grayson's seat, came in second place here, right next to Dina Grayson. Dina Grayson, by the way, not prevailing, though she shared her husband Alan Grayson's name in this. And so We also have, among other things, a very interesting Senate race. Evan Axelbank joins me now. You heard Matt Towery going into the matchup. Our Fox 13 polling shows that Murphy is within 3 points of Marco Rubio. What's your take?
Well, I think we're going to see, and I think it's interesting, first of all, that the establishment candidates won in almost all the races across the state of Florida. You know, nobody likes Congress except their own congressman, right? But I think what you're going to see is a couple things here. One is you're going to see Marco Rubio, he has a balancing act to do. He's going to have to figure out how to tap into the energy that Trump voters have provided to the Trump campaign, but also keep those core supporters he has in Miami. Many of them are very suspicious of Donald Trump's immigration policies, and that is going to be a very tricky thing for Marco Rubio to do, to keep the support in Miami amongst many of the Latino supporters he has there, and at the same time tap into that Trump kind of spirit that is driving the Republican Party right now.
Especially when he called him a con artist.
Right.
He would do irreparable harm to the Republican Party.
That's right.
You can't unring the bell.
He called him a con artist, yet he's still voting for him, and you know that's something that Patrick Murphy is going to point out. For the Murphy side of things here, I think what you're going to see from Patrick Murphy is he's going to try to nationalize this race. That goes to your point. He is going to try to make this race Rubio equals Trump. Trump stood up to Rubio. Trump battled Rubio hard in those debates. And Patrick Murphy is going to say, why are you still supporting this guy after what he said about you? Have you no spine? I also think something interesting about this race is going to be the sort of reverse impact. How is this race going to impact the race for the White House in the state of Florida? I've spoken to several Democrats across the state, some of them federal, some of them state level, who all say that now that Rubio is back on the ticket, remember, Rubio was not even supposed to be in this race. Now that he's back on the ticket, what they're saying is, we're worried now about our numbers in Miami because some of the Republican voters, remember, there are more Republican voters in Miami than there are anywhere else in the state. What they're worried about is that Rubio is now going to drive turnout from Republican voters in Miami-Dade County, though that's a county that the Democrats badly want to win. George W. Bush did very well there. When the Republicans started to not do so well there, they lost the state of Florida. In this case, Marco Rubio could help drive the turnout in the Senate in Florida, and then also mean more Republicans could come to the polls in the White House race.
Very good, Evan. Thank you for staying up late with us. By the way, I want to go to the David Jolly race. This was the first winner of the night. David Jolly wins big over Mark Bircher. We spoke to him. That was one of the more interesting races, and we found out that Mark Bircher had not even planned to run for that seat had he known Jolly would run. Take a look. Would you have entered this race, Mr. Bircher, had you known that David Jolly would seek re-election?
I would not have.
Why then not get out of it now?
Because when I had 8 months of running for the seat and people were pouring their hearts out in many ways to support me, and ironically, many of my supporters were Representative Jolly people, his people that supported him, because the position that the county, the 13th Congressional District was in, was not even having a candidate to oppose Governor Christ.
Coming up, Florida Republican Chairman Blaise Ingoglia joins us on set with a look at November, and we'll take you behind the scenes at the elections office to show you how it all comes together.
Well, in the statewide Senate race, we had a Republican primary, Democratic primary, and this year a Libertarian primary because we had two Libertarians running. And take a look at how this one turned out. Here we have Paul Stanton trouncing Augustus Saul Invictus. And this was one of the more interesting races. You have, in this case, the former chairman of the Libertarian Party resigning in protest of the Invictus candidacy. And I want to go back to our interview with Invictus for just a few seconds to give you a sense of why.
So the only thing that you can do to change the government is to arm yourselves and be prepared for war.
So when you speak of total insurrection, you're speaking of violent insurrection.
I am.
And did you in fact sacrifice a goat?
That happened.
And so with this, Invictus has been defeated. Of course, the big story in the Republican race, it is all Marco Rubio. Look at that, with 72% of the vote. Again, we keep coming back to the fact that Carlos Baruf spent more than $8 million of his own money. In the Democratic race, Patrick Murphy wins very big, defeating Alan Grayson overwhelmingly here. At this point, you have to think what Republicans are wondering about this particular matchup with Marco Rubio. So tonight, our special guest has a little bit of insight on that. Okay, well, please welcome Republican Party Chairman of Florida, Blaise Ingoglia. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about the Senate race. So you have Patrick Murphy, who was a Republican, perceived by many as a moderate, versus Marco Rubio. That could be a nail-biter, could it not?
I think Murphy is perceived as somebody who really hasn't done anything in Congress, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk about this November. Look, it is important that this seat remains in Republican hands. Marco Rubio has done a very good job as our U.S. Senator. He warrants being reelected, but what's most important is that we keep the Senate in Republican hands to have a check on the executive branch, because we need to make sure that the Supreme Court is as conservative as possible.
Okay, so Rubio has Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, who in the heat of battle, he called him a con man, and of course Trump hurled some insults at Rubio. Does it help or hurt Marco Rubio to have Trump at the top of the ticket and vice versa?
I think Donald Trump helps Marco Rubio and Marco Rubio helps Donald Trump. Donald Trump has brought out a bunch of new voters into the process. Our best estimates is during the March 15th presidential primary here in the state of Florida, 155,000 new voters who did not vote in 2012 and 2014 came out to vote. Those people are going to be voting in the November elections. And Donald Trump won 66 out of 67 counties. The only county that he did not win was Miami-Dade County, which is Marco Rubio's home county. And Marco Rubio is going to be pushing out Republican voters in that county. So I believe they have a great symbiotic relationship.
Let's get into state politics. Give us your forecast for November. Do you expect Republicans to lose ground, any ground in the state Senate, given the fact that the maps were redrawn as they were?
Look, I think that there's always a possibility that you can lose some of these races, but I will tell you that we're expecting to keep the majority in the Florida Senate. I know that they have been working extremely hard. They've been getting their message out. They've been knocking on doors and making phone calls for months now. I'm totally expecting that to stay in Republican hands.
And with the advent of redrawn maps in the congressional races, do you think Republicans may also lose ground in the congressional delegation as well?
No, and this is where I think that Marco Rubio and Donald Trump are going to help drive a lot of the voters out throughout the state of Florida. I'm expecting us to keep all of those seats. Presidential years are different than midterm elections. Midterm elections is where we traditionally dominate. Presidential elections are a little bit more competitive, so we may lose one, and those are the seats that we say that we've rented. Maybe we shouldn't have won them in the first place, but we're going to fight hard for them to keep them.
Okay, so Democrats outnumber Republicans in the state of Florida, but in voter registration, Republicans have been closing the gap this year.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say about the Democrats outnumbering Republicans, we have cut that almost in half. But a lot of those Democrats are actually Republicans at heart. When you look at these counties where Democrats outnumber Republicans, sometimes 2-to-1, you'll see that they vote overwhelmingly Republican, especially for the top of the ticket for U.S. Senate and President. But what's important here is that we've been working hard over the last 2 years. Over the last 18 months, the Republican Party of Florida, we have flipped 10 out of the 67 counties from majority Democrat to majority Republican, including Pinellas County. You're going to see that trend continue, and I believe that maybe not by the next election, the midterm election, but by the next presidential elections, Republicans are going to be the dominant force here, and we're going to have more registered Republicans and Democrats.
In the U.S. Senate race, do you think Marco Rubio's seat is the tipping point in terms of control? Either Indiana or more likely Florida will decide which party controls that chamber?
I think it's going to be important. I think Florida and it's going to come down to Florida and Ohio when it comes to the Senate race. Marco Rubio and Rob Portman, both of them are outperforming the polls. I'm expecting them to win both.
Blaise Ingoglia, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Coming up, see what it takes to pull off a primary and how they'll gear up for November. And Trump is gearing up for an immigration speech that could shake up the race to the White House.
Well, last night we took you behind the scenes of a political sign factory, and tonight we're going behind the scenes at the Hillsborough County Elections Office.
A vote is our voice, our right, and our duty.
I hope every American will turn out and vote.
You and me.
Get out there. Go vote now.
But while we can all see the results, we don't often see what it takes to pull it off.
There's a lot of moving parts.
And it's a lot of parts to move.
There's a tremendous amount of planning.
Ballots have been flying out of the Hillsborough Election Center for weeks. They're printed, folded, and fed down the line. The machine slips on a secrecy sleeve, tucks in a return envelope, and spits out a package addressed to the voter who requested it.
Here they go.
Then they sort the ballots by zip code to get a postal discount. This is bulk shipping by the ton. One box of ballots can weigh more than 1,200 pounds. Election staffers load ballots by forklift onto a moving truck for their trip to the post office. Then they gather all the signs and scanners and rows of equipment and ship them out to some 300 voting sites across Hillsborough County.
Everything that goes in and out of this door is barcoded. And we know when it goes out, when it comes back, and where it's going.
But that wasn't always the case.
No, everything was pretty much stacked in a corner.
Craig Latimer was part of a team that took over after a slew of problems.
I forgot all of them.
Under former Supervisor Buddy Johnson, the county had machine failures, software glitches, delays in the returns. 6,000 absentee ballots arrived on Election Day. An audit found sloppy accounting and improper spending. And after Johnson left, Latimer found a box with 800 uncounted ballots collecting dust.
Those 800 ballots had never been tabulated. To make sure that in fact the results are coming up appropriately.
But as the current supervisor of elections, Latimer worked hard to restore public trust, and it showed in 2012. While other parts of the state had reporting delays and 7-hour lines, the Secretary of State cited Hillsborough as a model for doing it right.
I'm used to planning and I'm used to training, and we certainly started a lot of that here.
A staff of 42 swells to a team of hundreds, then thousands as we approach Election Day.
Ask the voter to read the oath,
and read the oath,
sign, and accept.
Some just learned how to use iPad minis to check in voters. Others spent days testing the electronic voter ID system, while others tested and retested the ballot scanners.
We use what we call a test deck with a predetermined outcome so that we're able to ascertain that it did in fact count the votes correctly.
And between all of the testing and planning and training,
Mr. Latimer.
Thank you.
Latimer reaches out to citizens. In this case, new citizens, to encourage them to vote. And after those votes get counted, he'll store the paper ballots among the millions of other pages from elections past. And then gear up for the next campaign.
We get excited about elections.
Coming up, the FBI could release much more information about Hillary Clinton's email troubles, and Donald Trump will clarify his position on immigration.
Well, we have two big national stories in the making this week. Look for the FBI to release its notes that drove its decision to not charge Hillary Clinton in the email scandal. Meanwhile, Donald Trump in Arizona will clarify, roll out specifically his plan as it relates to deportation and immigration. We're all over it. Of course, we'll be back again tomorrow night. Thank you for joining us for Money Power Politics tomorrow night.